On-
So sorry about that.
no problem. Sorry. On July 11th, 1853, she left her home, accompanied by her father and her future father-in-law, went to Bremen and then to Bremerhaven, where she boarded the steamship Washington, bound for New York. Wow. She was 24 years old and spoke not a word of English when she traveled alone to Germany to the United States, from Germany to the US. Her father found some young women companions for her on the ship. And as you can read here, she slipped into a first-class berth with one of those friends. And that relieved her of the odor and the bed bugs that plagued the passengers in second class. Seasickness also plagued her, and I love this quote. Just to hear the machines groan and roar is enough to make me seasick. On top of that, another passenger pressed his unwanted attentions on Amelia and her friends, and the ship was so overcrowded, the crew had to build passenger cabins on the deck. Now, I'm pretty sure this is the ship she took because she listed the name Washington and the company, and this ship did the Bremerhaven, New York loop for exactly the dates that Emilie traveled. So I'm pretty sure this was the ship, you know, and you can see the side wheel as well as the sails. The unpleasant voyage finally ended 3 weeks later when she landed in New York, and some relatives of German friends and a Lutheran pastor and his wife from Germany welcomed her to New York. Of New York, she wrote, and I quote her, "Life here in this great city seems to go on in a sort of frantic way. The streets are very crowded and there is much traffic. The heat prostrated her some days, but she rallied on others, and the variety and abundance of food at the Washington market truly impressed her. She wrote home, to think that daily this much food is sold and consumed. One can hardly believe it." And I find this absolutely fascinating. Well, her friends put her on a train from New York to Toledo. The anticipated travel time was supposed to be 36 hours. They supplied her with a letter of introduction to give to conductors along the way, since they were unable to find anybody who spoke German, despite the fact that Pastor Brom had assured her there's always someone who can speak German. Life was different. The train proved to be the most hazardous part of Emilie's journey. Changing trains at Dunkirk, New York, you can see something dreadful happened. Against my will, I was being misdirected and practically pushed on a boat on Lake Erie. I would have landed in Michigan if I had not finally met a man who could speak German and who intervened just in time. Now, Emilie explained this near kidnapping as the work of agents of a shipping company who tried to coerce her into paying them, saying, "Oh, no, you need to go this way for a trip across Lake Erie." And then, of course, she would have had to pay again to get back to where she wanted to go. Now, other German immigrants recorded similar experiences of unscrupulous agents taking advantage of those just off the boat who spoke no English. So unfortunately, this was quite common. But worse was to happen. She arrived at Toledo at 3 a.m. She had no idea how to find a hotel where she could stay until the canal boat departed in the morning. A Frenchman who apparently spoke German offered to guide her to a German hotel. But when he tried to kiss her in the dark, lonely streets, she wrote, "I fled down the street with a cry. I was never so frightened in all my life." Well, subsequently, The man asked her forgiveness and took her to a hotel where she passed the remainder of the night. She was grateful that 3 men at the hotel, who were also taking the canal boat, offered to help her. So, final stage of her journey was the canal boat ride, which she found tranquil and safe compared to the train. Once on board, as she wrote to her family, I felt so happy and lucky as I sat in the neat and comfortable little boat and knew that I had only a simple and comfortable boat trip before I would reach my goal. Unfortunately, there was low water and the boat had to wait several times. So what was supposed to be a 2-day trip, 4 days. Nonetheless, when she landed in Lafayette, and you see here, this was the same image on the first slide, the bird's eye view of 1868 Lafayette. She was so happy to see, quote, her dear Koenig, who met her at the landing in Lafayette, and he took her to the home of a parishioner. She was overjoyed to see Friedrich looking well and happy, though, as she wrote, he still cannot get over the terrible time I had to my trip from the East. Well, she made it. She made it. So, Emilie Lohman waited about a month for her marriage to Friedrich Koenig, and she missed her family terribly. She wrote home in September of 1853, my heart is filled with longing and homesickness for all of you. She explained that Friedrich was very understanding and he encouraged her to cry her eyes out, which helped her cope with those feelings. At this time, Germans were the largest group of European immigrants in Indiana, almost 30,000 out of just under 1 million in the state. And by the way, in Tippecanoe County in 1850, there were the population was 19,377, and there were 282 German born. So let's somewhere, 250 maybe German, people of German origin in Lafayette at the time. It's interesting that it's really important to realize how varied the German-speaking population was, varied by region of origin, religion, social class. And in Indiana, Germans were not all poor. Many came with money, many worked and became landowners or proprietors rather quickly. Emilie enjoyed the hospitality of a German immigrant family in Lafayette named Atkins, and I will return to them later, who also helped her adjust to American customs. And as she said up here, she initially felt uncomfortable with the unconstrained manner in which the Americans live, but the longer I live here, the better I like it. She was also amazed at the small spaces of the houses. While she stayed with the Atkins, again, waiting to marry Friedrich, she shared a room, quote, with Mrs. Atkins, the girls, I think she meant the servants, and the 2 children. Privacy was almost impossible. Fortunately, oh, and I'm going to get to the gifts and the kindnesses. This is something that happened throughout her time in Lafayette. The Atkins helped her, friends and neighbors gave them gifts, and I will return to this point. But right now, I want to show you that the parsonage of St. James, in her own sketch, was relatively large compared to other houses in Lafayette. And after she was married and they moved into the parsonage, by the way, I found it really interesting. She wore a black dress and veil for her own wedding. That's what she wore. She described the St. James Church, which is currently the site of the Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church and the parsonage, both located on the corner of Ferry and Ninth. And she described it as being on the outskirts of town, almost in the country. Which I'm grateful. Adhered to German customs as much as possible, including prayer, religious holidays, food, and the German language. And this was quite typical of German American communities throughout the country. Historians note the particular importance of women in the preservation of their German cultural heritage. They were Kulturträgerinnen, culture bearers. For many German Lutherans in the US, German language was an essential part of their faith, and at St. James, services were conducted in German. And like many Lutheran churches in the US, St. James started its own school. And she wrote home that Frederick was busy with teaching school 3 days a week, confirmation classes 2 days a week, sermon preparation, and visiting the sick at all times. As the pastor's wife, Emilie visited all the women in the parish. And as an indication of her commitment to German practices, she wrote, "At Christmas, we will also make a treat for the school children according to the good old German custom. And one thing I definitely intend to do, that is to bake a real German Kuchen." Unlike in Germany, where churches enjoyed state support, German immigrants in the US organized and constructed their own churches, and pastors in the United States were poor. That is why, according to Emilie, parishioners and even non-churchgoers gave them so many gifts, including milk, fresh meat, flowers, vegetables, flour, tea, sugar, a fried chicken, curtains, a rug, and homemade soap. She writes, all the women make their own soap. She wrote, they would feel insulted and hurt if the pastor did not accept their gifts with thanks. Emilie was always grateful for the generosity of friends and neighbors in Lafayette. So remember that. She was always impressed with that. When she accompanied Friedrich to a pastor's conference in Indianapolis in October of 1853, overcoming her fear of train travel, take the train from Lafayette to Indianapolis, she was shocked at some stories about religious practices in the state. And she heard about so-called temperance sect that actually celebrates Holy Communion by using buttermilk instead of wine. And she also mentioned that Methodists also caused disturbances. I think from the perspective of Emilie and other Germans, and it was not just her, the Methodists passionate revivalism was just a little too enthusiastic and disorderly. Even within St. James Church, dissension was common because there were other Protestants from Germany, notably the Reformed Calvinists, who worshiped together with the Lutherans. And as she reports, there was much bickering and unrest in the congregation and quarrels between the members. Koenig had to censure some of the parishioners, but after much prayer and the passing of time, peace was restored. Furniture. I'm going to start with a stove. Emilie was enchanted with the cooking stove that she and Friedrich purchased with the help of Mrs. Atkins. Now, this stove is one that is in the collection, and it's a sheet iron stove brought overland from West Virginia to Lafayette in 1849 or 50. Thanks, Kelly. But I also included an advertisement from the Lafayette Journal and Courier for a store that sold stoves. Maybe she went there. It is really practical, American style, so that I can cook comfortably on it for 16 people. The stove came with pots, pans, teapot, coffee pot, large kettle for boiling clothes, a roaster, and all one needs for baking bread, kuchen, cakes, and pies. While the stove was the most expensive item in the Koenig house, it only cost $21. The copper pan and the copper kettle are also in the collection from the time period. Now, the china, again, from the TCHA collection, did not belong to Emilie, but is from the period and is in the TCHA collection. This teapot was made it's labeled by the Ludwigsburg porcelain manufacturers. Okay, more furniture. Sofas and upholstered furniture were not common in the United States, according to Emilie, but no room is without its rocking chair. And thanking her family for sending her a very delicately embroidered footstool, she notes that American tastes were more flamboyant than German tastes. And she wrote, "Here, everything is splashy and done in loud colors." And so Kelly found this lovely example. She noticed that beds in America were different from those in Germany due to the small size of the homes. She wrote, "They stand on legs 1.5 foot high. Little curtains hang from the mattress to the floor, usually made of colored fabric. Under these beds, they frequently have a smaller, lower bed on rollers, which one can pull out at night. The trundle bed." I love it, and it's in the collection. They also use it for storage because, of course, these small houses didn't have much room. She wrote, "A great show is made of beds here, for they frequently have them in their living rooms." And indeed, many folks in Lafayette, she and Friedrich slept in the living room in winter because it was the warmest room in the house. The large bedspreads were, as she noted earlier, very showy, and quilts of varied colors patched together were popular. Now we move on to food. So Emilie tried to cook the way she did in Germany, and she wrote that she and Frederick ate butter bread and coffee for breakfast instead of meat. And as you can see here, she noticed that Americans ate a lot of meat, and so did other German immigrants. So she said, she wanted to serve a lot of vegetables the way they did in Germany, but I fear I will soon have to follow the American custom of eating much meat. Nonetheless, she also notes that they could get plenty of fresh vegetables at the farmers market in Lafayette, held 3 times a week in the morning from 5 to 7, a little earlier than they do now. She also, I just found this interesting, she noted that here the men usually do the buying. Maybe we can talk about this later. She claims that she and Friedrich adopted the American practice of drinking tea in the evening unless they had German milk soup. Milk soup, sometimes called lump soup, was a traditional German comfort food made of noodles or rice or bread boiled in milk. And I found this online. She cooked on Saturday so that on Sunday she had only to reheat the food and cook potatoes. She baked white bread twice a week rather than the dense rye bread of Germany. And thanks to Mr. Atkins, who brought her cabbage, sausage, and spare ribs, she put up sauerkraut and salted pork for later consumption. Now, I wish I had more information on this. She commented extensively about servants. And she mentioned to her family that some servant parishioners had gifted her and Frederick a very nice rug. And she said, you probably wonder, how could a servant afford to give us a really nice rug? She writes, they really have it very good here in America. They earn very much money, most of them between $1.50 and $2, and are treated like daughters in the house. And then elaborating upon the free time, the presents, the fine clothes, and the easy tasks that servant girls enjoyed, Emilie noted that labor was in such short supply that, quote, whoever has a good maid does everything possible to keep her. She also wrote that she felt sorry for the children in even prosperous homes because they picked up the slack by doing housework starting at age 6. According to Emilie, they had no childhood. Now, I have no data on wage rates and labor supply in Lafayette at mid-century. But letters from other German immigrants in Indiana at the time indicate that farm labor was scarce and expensive. One German farmer traveled to Indianapolis looking for workers and couldn't find any. Another paid workers and products from the land whenever possible. In both cases, German immigrants relied on the entire family, including children, working the land. And I just show this to you because this is from the census. And I found residents of Lafayette named Apkins. I'm thinking this might be the Atkins family because the father, brickmaker, born in Germany, the wife, Gertrude, born in Germany, the 2 children, Ella and George, born in Indiana, and a laborer living with them and his wife from Holland and Germany, respectively. So I'm kind of thinking this might be that family that hosted her before her. They became very close friends. And the Atkins were also, at least the wife, I can't remember, probably the husband, were parishioners in St. James. Okay, so sickness, and notably fevers, were very common in 19th century Indiana and in the entire world before knowledge about germ theory. Medical professionals worked hard to understand fevers, including typhoid fever, typhus, and cholera, all bacteria-borne and associated with tainted water. Like other German immigrants to Indiana, Emilie experienced frequent sickness. In the winter, this was the winter of 53-54, Friedrich and Emilie suffered influenza in turn. And when Emilie was sick, she marveled at Friedrich's helpfulness. She wrote, this is the custom here in America, that if the wife is ill, the man takes care of the housework. And so dear Koenig kept everything in good order, cooked, cleaned, and scrubbed. And now some other Germans had a different take on this practice. German Americans, we could talk about that later. And you notice here, this is something that is in the bicentennial book. It's another entry, but there was a cholera epidemic in 1854, in the summer of 1854. In that summer of 1804, Emilie was pregnant, and the heat bothered her tremendously. Now, I have to turn to a letter that her husband, Friedrich, wrote to her father in Germany. Several days after giving birth to a healthy daughter on July 16th, Emilie became extremely nervous and developed a high fever. The doctor was very concerned. He diagnosed Emilie with Nervenfieber, typhoid fever. The doctor and Frederick, in Frederick's words, watched over her day and night. Nothing was left undone. As she became more delirious, Friedrich prayed with her. He wrote that she became lucid at such moments, and she affirmed her complete faith in Christ. She died on July 28, 1854, with, quote, a saintly expression of rest and peace on her face. The baby girl, named Marie Gertrude Claudine, lived with the Apkins while Friedrich tended Emilie until the child died shortly thereafter. Both are buried in Greenbush Cemetery. Kelly Lippy took this photo, and you can't really read on the gravestone, so I've written what it said about Emilie Koenig, the wife of the pastor, Emilie Koenig, and the quotation from John. Now, I tried to find the baby's grave, and I could not find a headstone or any stone. There actually is a small stone, a child's grave near this one. But Kelly suggested that they didn't keep perfect records at Greenbush Cemetery during that time. But she did give me an image of the list of burials in the records at Greenbush Cemetery. And there is a record of, it just says infant, German, but born in Indiana, who died in September of 1854. So I'm wondering if that might be the child. Okay, just a little bit. Frederick Koenig continued at St. James until 1858. His second wife was Helena Reinking of Adams County, Indiana, and they had several children. He later became a pastor of churches in Cincinnati and New York, where he died in 1891. In 1853-54, the issue of slavery roiled the United States, notably whether or not to extend it in Western territories that eventually became states. Tensions between abolitionists and slavery supporters also occurred in Lafayette. And so Lucy Lugo helped me get this little article from the local paper about German communities in the United States generally opposed to allowing settlers to determine the legality of slavery in the future state of Nebraska, since it violated the Missouri Compromise of 1820. And also, this is the document. I found this online in the U.S. Library of Congress, but this is the actual Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. It happened in May, but see, the discussion about it was a huge deal. Other local issues at the time included the ramifications of the new Indiana Constitution of 1851 on government and schools in the state, and certainly the economic development of the economic development of Lafayette, including the extension of railroads. Now, these issues never appeared in Emilie Koenig's letters. Instead, she fulfilled expectations for German middle-class women to marry, have children, and devote themselves to domestic responsibilities. As an immigrant and the wife of a Lutheran pastor, she did what she thought was God wanted her to do. And I love this quote here about when they were married, and they called her Frau Pfarrer or Mrs. Koenig. But I love the actual German, what the literal translation is Mrs. Pastor. So that's what they called her. And she took that very seriously. She preserved German cultural traditions, including food and the German language. And she assisted her husband in acceptable ways, like meeting with the women of the parish. By the way, there's no evidence that she learned English or even felt that she had to, because they spoke German all the time. I also think it's important, I think what her letters reveal to us is she was adventurous and brave, embarking on a voyage across the Atlantic all by herself to an unknown country traveling overland in the US as a lone young woman who spoke no English. She embraced life in the new country, learning and adapting to American practices, except for English. The detailed observations of her life in America that she sent to her family in Germany reveal her curiosity, her openness, her prejudices, sensitivity, and humanity. It is sad that she died so young, but we are fortunate that she left a precious written record of daily life in Lafayette in the 19th century. Thank you. I got a two-page bibliography if anybody wants to know about the research. And it was so much fun. Well, I'm sure there's a lot of questions because she was so interesting. And I know many of you know so much about her.
Did she know Friedrich in Germany? Okay, that wasn't arranged. Correct.
Yeah, right. But both families approved.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's a little sort of like a pamphlet publication from the Concordia Historical Institute. And it's in TCHA, and Kelly just showed it to me. Yeah. And again, I'm so glad I didn't have to read the original German.
Oh,
Yeah.
so we know that they knew each other, but what other pastors of the time, would their wives have been arranged marriages from their home country at the time?
I don't know the answer to that, Claire. I can tell you a few bits of information. Okay, Pastor Brahm, who took care of her in New York, I'm pretty sure he and his wife were from Germany. Now, Friedrich's second marriage was to, the name sounded German. I think she was a German American living in Indiana. I can't really answer that question, which is an excellent one. But what I can say that is somewhat related is the Lutherans in the United States, and notably the ones in this region, were really concerned about recruiting pastors from Germany to minister to the German Americans. And so there was a huge recruiting effort from a man named Whitney. I can check to make sure I got that correct. Was it Whitney? Whitney. And he actually, he published a pamphlet, circulated it in Germany. He went to Germany recruiting pastors. And I think that's how probably Friedrich Koenig learned about it, and he became very committed. I mean, he saw himself as a missionary. And then, and Emilie, after he got here and got the job and proposed marriage to her, she accepted. But that's a really great question. I have done, there might be something about that in some of the articles I was reading, because, so let me see if I can find out, Claire. Other.
So kind of related to that, with you were talking about they didn't have to learn English because there were so many in the community. Did she write anything in her letters about the parishioners? Like what were other Germans doing here in Lafayette that would have been attending church there? They would have been together so much and speaking German to each other. Was curious. Did she write about any of the church members?
Yes, she did. She did. She wrote a lot about Mrs. Atkins.
Okay.
And there was another church member whose husband was an unbeliever. So the wife was a parishioner and the husband was not, but she said he was really nice, you know. She, one thing that I found kind of interesting is that St. Boniface Church was started by German Catholics in 1853, and she never mentioned it. I mean, she was here.
Right.
When they started it, and she just never mentioned it. So I think, I get the impression that their life was very focused around the church. And again, this was very common in German American communities throughout the country. That they were very close. They worshiped together. They obviously had disagreement, and spoke German. Yeah.
Kind of along the line of my great grandfather came for my brother. But in reading letters and notes from my grandmother, she said they spoke German in the house, which would have been in 1890.
Yeah,
And I went to kindergarten.
doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
it's just unbelievable.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Just an aside to that, I know at St. Boniface, all of the services were in German till like the First World War, when they decided they wanted to show their patriotism.
Excellent.
And my other question though was, what was going on in Germany at this time? Is there a particular reason Germans wanted to leave the country? Like there were in other places, economic.
All of the above. No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. There were kind of different waves of immigration, including from Germany. And in the early part of the end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815, Germany was changing dramatically. Well, of course, the wars had been very, very disruptive because they happened a lot in Germany under Napoleon. But there were different German states that had to reconstitute themselves after the wars were over. And since state and church relations were pretty close, it meant there was a lot of turmoil in different parts of Germany. And the governments in many of the German states after the Napoleonic Wars, some of them were liberal, some of them were really conservative. They wanted to put a lid on revolutionary ideas. And also, the economy in many parts of Germany suffered in that period following the Napoleonic Wars. And so I would say the motivation for many Germans migrating were political, they were economic, and also sort of immigration became an industry. And in both the United States and in Germany, there were these basically travel agents. And Germans in the United States wrote home, and they would encourage other Germans to migrate, and they would also tell them both the merits and the hazards of coming to the United States. I mean, I read these other German letters because I wanted to see how Emilie's impressions compared. They're pretty consistent, but they found it was possible to earn a good living, to own your own land in America, and that was a good thing. Many of them objected to American practices. They found them kind of lazy. And again, these agents who would mislead newly arrived immigrants, that was pretty bad. They all agreed Americans ate a lot of meat. This was really consistent. But then the Revolution of 1848 that happened throughout Europe, and the end of that revolution led to, more conservative governments in different German states, and a lot of kind of progressive Germans left Germany after the 1848 revolutions to come to the United States. And many of them became politically active, they became abolitionists. So here again was a political motivation for coming to the United States.
Were there any quotas at that time?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I haven't come across any of that. I think, was there a question here? Yeah, and then,
I just had a comment about the black wedding dress.
yes.
I have a picture of my grandmother who was from the same time in a black wedding dress.
Fascinating. And where was your grandmother from?
Her parents were from Germany, but she was local.
Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah, thank you. Yes.
You said the German Lutheran pastors were poor, so I'm assuming they didn't have servants, household servants. And then you also said the overpaid household servants made $1.50 or so. In how long? I'm assuming it's not per hour.
I don't think so.
Week or month?
Yeah, I'm guessing. I don't know. What do you think?
Per month.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I wish I had found more. That's really interesting. And you're right, Emilie never mentions a servant in their own house. She did all the work except when she was sick, and then Frederick did it. So, and that's why these gifts were just so important to them. Because, and this again was very common. Sorry, Dave, and then.
You know, one thing I know that this wouldn't have affected them directly because they were Lutherans, but 1854, 1855 was the height of the Know Nothing movement.
Yes.
Which, to nobody's surprise, Indiana was a hotbed.
Yeah, right.
And they were
Yes.
very much, you know, anti-Catholic, anti-Irish, anti-German.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of killings and church burnings and riots.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. Surprisingly, I know Indianapolis was pretty quiet, probably because there were so many Germans there to begin with. But in a place like Lafayette, I don't know the history.
And I don't.
Everywhere else, it was pretty nasty.
Yes, yeah, that's a great question. And I'll have to look into, that's a really good question. I believe when I was looking through the newspapers, they may have mentioned the Know Nothing Party, but in general, it seemed at least, yeah, not to have been really hateful here. But that's a great question. I'll have to look into that. Thank you.
Did Emilie, granted, she was quite ill at the end, did she continue to write any about the typhoid? Because the 1854 typhoid was very characteristic.
Yes,
Did
yes.
she talk about, for example, people leaving Lafayette to escape?
No, she couldn't write.
Right.
Yeah, you know, she was pregnant, then she got sick.
And she happened to mention the physician's name.
She did, actually. I'm so glad you mentioned that. Because I can't find him. Dr. Eisner. And and he was German. He was German. Now, I looked up the doctors in Lafayette. I didn't see a Dr. Eisner. I have seen a name, Isley, spelled differently, but again, like the Atkins, maybe. I was kind of thinking Friedrich might have imported him from Indianapolis, but I don't know. But I think that's a really interesting question, and I
At
tried.
that time, vast majority of physicians were apprentice trained. There were
Mhm.
very, very few who went to any formal schooling. But interesting enough, in 1854, the reason why the typhoid was so bad in 1854 was because now we had the canal. And
Yes.
that particular way the typhoid went all the way up and down the canal.
Yes,
Because people believed that miasma caused the
Yes.
disease, they would typically flee the town.
yes,
And in Lafayette, the businessmen told the editors of the newspaper they could not talk about the typhoid.
yes.
It was bad for business.
Yep, that's right. That's right.
But there was an interesting new physician who was in town, might have treated her, may not. His name was William Worrell Mayo.
Oh,
Would
my
go on
goodness.
with his two sons.
Yeah.
form the Mayo Clinic.
Wow, yeah.
And he actually wrote in his biography about the 1854 typhoid fever, granted this, because that was where he had just completed his training, was now in his first year of actually doing medicine, treating people in town, and how bad it was for that reason. But it's an interesting little twist, a little tie.
It is. No, it's really interesting. And it's so interesting because there was the cholera. What I found is typhoid, everybody got typhoid, but cholera was really bad. And so they had an epidemic in 1849 and then this other one in 1854. And yeah, they didn't want to, spread the word too much. But a lot of the other German immigrants mentioned, oh yeah, typhoid. Yeah, every summer we get typhoid fever, and I think your point about the doctors and the medical practice, many of the German immigrants didn't trust American doctors, and I think you give us a good reason why. But what could you do, so that I think that's really interesting. And then I did read, some history of medicine stuff, and doctors were trying to figure this out throughout the 19th century in Europe and in the United States, trying to figure out. And as you said, the miasma theory was very common. And it wasn't until late in the 19th century that Koch and Pasteur, and there was a Brit, they finally, figured out the bacterial origin of this stuff. But yeah, everybody got it. It could be deadly.
That's also ague.
Ah,
Was in there.
yes.
And that was actually the reason Mayo left Lafayette. Because
Oh, really?
every year from May through August, everyone would be afflicted with the yellow fever. It was just something you expected. And he finally left because he said, I'm gonna go find someplace healthier, and ended up in Minnesota.
Get away from those mosquitoes. Well, they had mosquitoes there too, but different ones.
Any final questions?
I got one.
Yes.
Back to Frederick and being a family friend.
Yes.
Did you find any evidence that they courted while he was still in Germany?
Yeah, see, that's so interesting. He was really good friends with one or both of Emilie's brothers. And there was a family connection, I forget the exact. Her sister married into Koenig's family. And so, they knew each other pretty well. But in that publication that provided, a little bit of background information before they quoted her letters from the United States, they say there was no mention of any courtship at all until he wrote that letter from Lafayette in 1852. That's what they said. So they knew each other well, but no indication. I know, isn't that wild? And you get it in a letter,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but
All right.
she loved him. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for giving us another opportunity.
Oh,
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Take your time.
Great. Thank you.